I wasn't even there. Maya's voice rang out in the silent courtroom, sharp with desperation and truth. The tension in the air was thick, everyone frozen in disbelief. The prosecutor, a sharp-eyed man in a dark suit, smirked. The evidence says otherwise, Ms. Johnson. The cashier identified you. Officer Grant identified you. Maya's hands gripped the edge of the witness stand. She fought back tears, her voice trembling but growing louder. He's lying, and I can prove it. Gasps rippled through the courtroom. Even the judge leaned forward, her expression shifting from calm authority to keen interest. The prosecutor frowned. What proof could you possibly have? Maya reached into her pocket and held up a small piece of paper. This, she said firmly, her voice steady. It's my bus ticket from the day of the robbery. It proves I wasn't at the store. I was on the bus. Ask the driver. Check the cameras. I didn't do it. The courtroom froze. The prosecutor's smirk faded, and Officer Grant, sitting stiffly across the room, seemed to shrink into his seat. For a moment, no one spoke. Then the judge's gavel cracked against the wood. Order in the court, she commanded, her voice sharp. Ms. Johnson, hand that evidence to your attorney immediately. This trial just took a significant turn. The room buzzed with murmurs, but Maya remained steadfast, staring directly at Officer Grant. Her hands still shook, but her resolve was unbreakable. You arrested the wrong person, she said, her voice clear. And you knew it. The courtroom erupted. 2 months earlier, Maya Johnson had been an ordinary 16-year-old, navigating high school, homework, and the occasional drama with her best friend, Tasha. Life wasn't perfect. Her mom worked long hours as a nurse, and their small apartment always felt a little too cramped, but it was manageable. Until it wasn't. It started on a warm Tuesday afternoon. Maya had stayed late at school to finish a project and decided to take the bus home. The ride was uneventful, and she spent most of it sketching in her notebook, lost in the intricate details of a cityscape she'd been working on for weeks. She got home around 4 p.m., greeted by the comforting smell of her mom's cooking. It was a normal evening, filled with laughter and shared stories about their day. But by the next morning, her life would be turned upside down. The knock at the door came just as Maya was finishing breakfast. Her mom, Evelyn, opened it to find 2 uniformed officers standing there. Maya Johnson, one of them asked. Evelyn's brow furrowed. Yes, that's my daughter. What's this about? The officer ignored her, stepping inside. Maya Johnson, you're under arrest for robbery and assault. Maya froze, the words not registering. What? No, that's not. Before she could finish, the officer grabbed her wrists, snapping handcuffs into place. You have the right to remain silent, he began, his tone cold and detached. Mama, I didn't do anything. Maya cried, panic rising in her chest. Evelyn stepped forward, her voice trembling with fury. What is this about? My daughter didn't do anything wrong. The officer's partner spoke up. A convenience store was robbed yesterday afternoon. The cashier identified your daughter as the suspect. Maya shook her head furiously. That's impossible. I was on the bus at that time. I wasn't even near the store. But her protests fell on deaf ears as she was led out of the apartment in handcuffs. The neighbors peeked through their doors, their whispers cutting through the air like knives. The police station was a cold, intimidating place. Maya was placed in an interrogation room, her heart pounding as she waited. After what felt like hours, Officer Grant entered. His blue eyes were sharp, and his expression was unreadable. You're in a lot of trouble, Maya, he said, sitting across from her. We have a witness who says they saw you. Why don't you save us all some time and tell the truth? I am telling the truth. Maya shot back, her voice shaking. I wasn't there. I was on the bus. Check the cameras, check my ticket. I didn't do anything. Grant leaned back in his chair, his smirk infuriating. We'll see. Maya was released on bail that evening, but the damage had already been done. The next day at school, whispers followed her everywhere she went. Friends she had known for years avoided her, their eyes filled with doubt. Even Tasha seemed hesitant. Maya, she said carefully during lunch, are you sure you didn't? Maya slammed her tray down, her face red with frustration. I didn't do it, Tasha. Why does everyone think I did? Tasha bit her lip, looking away. It's just the police don't arrest people for no reason. Maya's chest tightened. You really think I could do something like that? I don't know what to think, Tasha admitted, her voice barely above a whisper. Maya stood abruptly, grabbing her bag. I don't need this, she muttered, leaving the cafeteria. Evelyn worked tirelessly to find an attorney who would take their case. After days of searching, they found Ms. Daniels, a sharp and determined lawyer with a reputation for fighting hard for her clients. "I believe you, Maya," Ms. Daniels said during their first meeting, "and we're going to prove your innocence. But it's not going to be easy." Maya nodded, her fear mixed with a flicker of hope. "I just want my life back." "Then let's get to work," Ms. Daniels said, her tone resolute. The trial began a month later, and the prosecution wasted no time painting Maya as a reckless teenager who had made a terrible decision. They paraded witnesses who claimed to have seen her, their accounts shaky but confident enough to sway the jury. But Ms. Daniels was relentless. She poked holes in the witnesses' stories, exposing inconsistencies and contradictions. She questioned the reliability of the cashier's identification and pointed out the lack of concrete evidence tying Maya to the crime. Still, the weight of the accusations was overwhelming. Maya sat quietly as the prosecution called Officer Grant to the stand. His testimony was damning, filled with confident assertions that painted Maya as guilty beyond a shadow of a doubt. Maya's resolve wavered, but Ms. Daniels reassured her. "We've got this," she whispered. "Trust me." The turning point came when Maya remembered the bus ticket. She dug through her backpack, her heart racing as she found the crumpled piece of paper. The timestamp was clear, 3:45 p.m., the exact time the robbery had occurred. Ms. Daniels grinned when Maya handed her the ticket. "This changes everything," she said, her voice brimming with determination. And now, standing in the courtroom, Maya held up the ticket for everyone to see. Her voice was steady, her gaze unwavering as she spoke the truth. The courtroom was frozen, every eye on her as the weight of her words sank in. The judge's gavel cracked against the wood. "This trial is far from over," she declared. "We will recess for the day. Court will reconvene tomorrow at 9 a.m. As the room emptied, Maya felt a strange mix of relief and apprehension. The battle wasn't over yet, but for the first time, she felt like she had a chance. The courtroom was buzzing with tension as people filed out, their whispers filling the air like static. Maya remained seated, her hands trembling despite the surge of confidence she felt moments earlier. The bus ticket had shifted the momentum, but she knew the fight was far from over. "Maya," Ms. Daniels said gently, placing a reassuring hand on her shoulder, "you were incredible today. That ticket is the turning point we needed." Maya nodded, but doubt lingered in her eyes. "What if they still don't believe me? What if they say it's not enough?" Ms. Daniels crouched down to meet Maya's gaze. "Let them try. We've planted doubt in their case. Tomorrow, we'll hit them with more. Trust me, Maya. The truth is on our side." Evelyn, Maya's mother, stepped forward, wrapping her arms around her daughter. "You've been so strong, baby. I'm proud of you." Maya leaned into her mother's embrace, grateful for the support. "I just want this to be over." "We'll get there," Evelyn said firmly. "One step at a time." That evening at home, Maya sat in her room, her sketchbook open but untouched. Normally, drawing calmed her nerves, but tonight her thoughts were too scattered. She replayed the events of the day, her confrontation with Officer Grant playing like a loop in her mind. Her phone buzzed, pulling her out of her thoughts. It was a text from Tasha. "Asterisk, you were amazing today. I'm sorry for doubting you before. I believe you now, asterisk." A small smile tugged at Maya's lips. "Thanks," she replied. "It means a lot." Despite the lingering fear, the message gave her a sliver of hope. Maybe things would get better after all. The next morning, Maya sat at the breakfast table, her appetite non-existent. Evelyn slid a plate of toast and eggs in front of her. "Eat," her mom urged. "You need your strength." Maya poked at the food with her fork. "What if they don't believe the ticket?" Evelyn sat down across from her, her expression stern but loving. "Then we'll keep fighting. You've got Ms. Daniels, and you've got me. We won't let them tear you down." Maya nodded, taking a small bite of toast. Her mom's unwavering faith gave her a flicker of courage. "Thanks, Mom." Evelyn smiled, reaching across the table to squeeze her hand. "You're stronger than you think, Maya. Don't forget that." The courtroom was packed again as the trial resumed. Maya's heart pounded as she took her seat beside Ms. Daniels, who seemed as calm and composed as ever. The prosecutor, however, looked tense, a stark contrast to their earlier confidence. The judge entered, and the room fell silent. "Court is now in session," she announced. "Counselor, you may proceed." Ms. Daniels stood, her voice clear and confident. "Your Honor, we have further evidence to corroborate my client's alibi. We would like to call our first witness." A man in his late 40s stepped forward, his tailored suit giving him an air of authority. He was sworn in and took the stand. "Please state your name and occupation," Ms. Daniels began. "Ravi Patel," the man replied. "I'm an accountant." "Mr. Patel, can you tell the court where you were on the afternoon of the robbery in question?" Ms. Daniels asked. "I was on the 42 bus, heading home from work," he said. "I take the same route every day." "And did you see anything unusual on the bus that day?" Ms. Daniels pressed. Patel nodded. "There was a young girl sitting across from me, sketching in a notebook. She caught my attention because her drawing was incredible." Ms. Daniels held up Maya's sketchbook, which had been submitted as evidence. "Is this the sketch you saw?" Patel leaned forward, adjusting his glasses. "Yes, that's the one." The courtroom buzzed with murmurs. Ms. Daniels smiled, turning to the jury. "Ladies and gentlemen, this witness confirms that my client was on the bus at the exact time the robbery occurred. She couldn't have been at the convenience store." The prosecutors stood for cross-examination, their tone sharp. "Mr. Patel, are you absolutely certain it was the defendant you saw that day?" Patel met their gaze evenly. "Yes, I remember her clearly. She was focused on her drawing the entire ride." The prosecutor frowned, but didn't press further. No further questions. As the trial continued, the prosecution struggled to recover. Their case, once seemingly airtight, now wobbled under the weight of mounting evidence in Maya's favor. Ms. Daniels continued to poke holes in their arguments, highlighting inconsistencies and emphasizing the lack of direct evidence. But the most dramatic moment came when Officer Grant was recalled to the stand. Ms. Daniels didn't hold back. "Officer Grant," she began, her tone sharp, "can you explain why you claim to have seen my client at the scene of the crime when you now admit that wasn't true?" Grant shifted in his seat, his face pale. "I relied on the cashier's statement," he said carefully. "I believed it to be credible." "But you didn't verify it," Ms. Daniels pressed. "Is that correct?" Grant hesitated, glancing around the room. "No, I didn't." "And yet you arrested a 16-year-old girl based on that unverified statement," Ms. Daniels said, her voice rising slightly. "Do you understand the damage that decision has caused?" Grant's jaw tightened, but he didn't respond. The silence in the courtroom was deafening. By the end of the day, the tension in the room was palpable. Maya felt exhausted but hopeful as the judge called for adjournment. She looked at Ms. Daniels, who gave her a reassuring nod. "We're almost there," Ms. Daniels said. "Stay strong, Maya." Maya nodded, but as she left the courtroom, she couldn't shake the feeling that something big was about to happen. That night, as Maya sat in her room, her phone buzzed with a new message. It was from an unknown number. The text read, "You think you've won, but this isn't over." Maya's heart raced as she stared at the screen, her mind racing with questions. Who had sent the message? And what did it mean? Maya's hands trembled as she stared at the glowing screen of her phone. The text message, "*You think you've won, but this isn't over*, replayed in her mind like a broken record. Her heart pounded in her chest, a chilling fear creeping up her spine. Who had sent this? Was it a threat? A warning? Evelyn knocked softly on Maya's door, peeking her head in. "Honey, everything okay?" Maya quickly locked her phone and forced a shaky smile. "Yeah, Mom. Just tired." Evelyn stepped inside, her brow furrowed. "You sure? You look pale." "I'm fine," Maya lied, though her voice betrayed her unease. "Really?" Evelyn didn't look convinced, but chose not to press. "Try to get some rest. Tomorrow's another big day." Maya nodded as her mom left the room, but sleep felt impossible. She sat on the edge of her bed, clutching her phone, her mind racing. Could it have been Officer Grant? The prosecutor? Someone else who didn't want her to win? The uncertainty gnawed at her. The next morning, Maya arrived at the courthouse with Evelyn and Ms. Daniels. The weight of the text message lingered, but she pushed it to the back of her mind. Today was too important. Inside the courtroom, the tension was palpable. The prosecution seemed more aggressive, their questions sharper, and their tone more confrontational. It was clear they were trying to regain control of the narrative, but Ms. Daniels was unshakable. "Your Honor," Ms. Daniels began, "we would like to present additional evidence that further discredits the reliability of the eyewitness account provided by the cashier." The prosecutor frowned. "Objection, Your Honor. This evidence was not disclosed before trial." The judge raised an eyebrow. "Overruled. Proceed, Counselor." Ms. Daniels handed a document to the court clerk, who distributed copies to the judge and jury. "This is a record of prior incidents involving the cashier," including one where their testimony was proven unreliable in a similar case. It demonstrates a clear pattern of misidentification. The murmurs in the courtroom grew louder. The prosecutor stood abruptly. "This is a smear tactic." Ms. Daniels turned to the prosecutor, her expression calm but piercing. "It's a fact, and facts are not tactics." The judge banged her gavel. "Order in the court. Counsel, you may proceed." Maya felt a surge of hope as the evidence was presented. The case against her was crumbling, but she couldn't shake the feeling that something was brewing beneath the surface. The text message loomed in her mind, an ominous shadow over what should have been a victorious moment. During a break, Maya pulled Ms. Daniels aside. "I need to tell you something," she said quietly, glancing around to ensure no one else could hear. "What is it?" Ms. Daniels asked, her tone serious. Maya showed her the text message. "I got this last night." Ms. Daniels's expression darkened as she read the words. "Did you tell your mom?" "No," Maya admitted. "I didn't want to worry her." Ms. Daniels nodded thoughtfully. "I'll look into it. For now, focus on the trial. Don't let this shake you." Maya nodded, though her nerves were frayed. The thought of someone trying to intimidate her only made her more determined to see this through. As the trial resumed, the defense called its final witness, a forensic analyst who had reviewed the security footage from the convenience store. The analyst's testimony was damning for the prosecution. "The footage is inconclusive," the analyst explained. "The suspect's face is obscured, and while they share a similar build to the defendant, it is impossible to definitively identify them as Ms. Johnson." The prosecutor attempted to discredit the testimony, but the damage was done. The jury looked visibly shaken, and even the judge seemed deep in thought. When court adjourned for the day, Maya felt a flicker of hope. Ms. Daniels smiled as they left the courthouse. "We're almost there," she said. "The jury is seeing the truth." But as they walked toward the parking lot, a figure stepped out of the shadows. It was Officer Grant. "Maya," he said, his voice low and steady. Ms. Daniels immediately stepped in front of her. "What do you want, Officer Grant?" "I need to talk to her," he said, his eyes fixed on Maya. "You can talk to her in court," Ms. Daniels snapped. "Anything you have to say should be on the record." Grant hesitated, then glanced around to ensure no one else was nearby. "You need to be careful," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. "There are people who don't want this to go your way." Maya's blood ran cold. "What do you mean?" Grant's jaw tightened. "I've said too much already." Without another word, he turned and walked away, leaving Maya and Ms. Daniels stunned. That evening, back at home, Maya replayed the encounter in her mind. Was Grant trying to warn her? Or was this another attempt to rattle her? She couldn't tell. All she knew was that the stakes were higher than ever. As she sat in her room, her phone buzzed again. This time, it was another unknown number. The message read, "Tomorrow will be your last day in court." Maya's heart dropped. Fear clawed at her chest, but she forced herself to stay calm. She showed the message to Evelyn, who immediately called Ms. Daniels. "This is serious," Ms. Daniels said over the phone. "We'll report this to the court first thing in the morning. They'll increase security." Maya nodded, though her fear was hard to suppress. Whoever was behind this wasn't going to intimidate her. She was innocent, and she would prove it. The next morning, the courthouse felt different. The tension was thicker, the air heavier. Security had been tightened, with more officers stationed around the building and metal detectors at every entrance. Maya's heart pounded as she walked through the bustling halls, clutching her mother's hand tightly. Ms. Daniels met them just outside the courtroom. Her face was calm, but her sharp eyes betrayed her concern. "I've informed the judge about the threats," she said. "She's taking it seriously. If you feel unsafe at any point, tell me immediately." Maya nodded, her grip on her mom's hand tightening. Evelyn gave her a reassuring squeeze. "We'll get through this, baby. One step at a time." Inside the courtroom, the energy was electric. The jury shuffled in, their expressions a mix of curiosity and wariness. The prosecutor's team seemed tense, their earlier confidence visibly shaken. Maya scanned the room and locked eyes with Officer Grant. He quickly looked away, but his unease was palpable. The judge entered, and the room fell silent. "Court is now in session," she announced. "We will begin with the defense's final argument." Ms. Daniels stood, her presence commanding as she addressed the jury. "Ladies and gentlemen," she began, her voice steady and clear, "this case is about more than a single crime. It's about fairness, justice, and the consequences of jumping to conclusions." She walked slowly across the courtroom, her gaze sweeping over the jurors. You've heard the testimony. You've seen the evidence. And most importantly, you've seen the lack of evidence against my client. Maya Johnson was not at that convenience store. She was on a bus, drawing quietly, as confirmed by an eyewitness and a time-stamped ticket. Ms. Daniels paused, letting her words sink in. The prosecution's case is built on assumptions and unreliable testimony. An innocent 16-year-old girl's life has been turned upside down because of a rushed investigation. But now, the truth is in your hands. She turned to Maya, her voice softening. Maya Johnson deserves justice. She deserves her life back. I urge you to see her for what she truly is. Not a criminal, but a victim of a flawed system. The courtroom was silent as Ms. Daniels returned to her seat. Maya felt a surge of gratitude and hope, but her nerves remained frayed. It all depended on the jury now. The prosecutor's closing argument was short and defensive. They tried to poke holes in the bus ticket's credibility and cast doubt on the eyewitness testimony, but their arguments lacked conviction. Maya could feel the jury's skepticism growing with each passing word. When the prosecutor finished, the judge gave the jury their instructions and dismissed them to begin deliberations. The waiting game began. Hours passed. Maya, her mom, and Ms. Daniels sat in a quiet corner of the courthouse, trying to stay calm as the jury deliberated. Evelyn brought Maya a sandwich, but she could barely eat. Every tick of the clock felt like an eternity. Finally, the bailiff entered the room. The jury has reached a verdict. Maya's stomach twisted. Her hands felt clammy as she followed Ms. Daniels and her mom back into the courtroom. The jury filed in, their expressions unreadable. Maya's heart pounded as the foreperson stood, holding the verdict in their hands. The judge addressed the jury. Has the jury reached a verdict? Yes, Your Honor, the foreperson replied. The room was so quiet that Maya could hear her own heartbeat. The foreperson unfolded the paper, their voice steady but loud enough to echo in the silent room. We, the jury, find the defendant, Maya Johnson, not guilty. The words hit Maya like a wave. Relief, disbelief, and overwhelming emotion crashed over her all at once. Evelyn let out a sob, pulling her daughter into a tight embrace. Ms. Daniels smiled, her expression triumphant. The judge banged her gavel. Order in the court. Ms. Johnson, you are free to go. This case is dismissed. As they exited the courthouse, reporters swarmed around them, cameras flashing and questions flying. Ms. Daniels shielded Maya from the chaos, leading her to a waiting car. Once inside, Maya let out a shaky laugh, tears streaming down her face. It's over, she whispered, her voice filled with disbelief. It's really over. Evelyn hugged her tightly. You were so brave, baby. I'm so proud of you. Ms. Daniels smiled. You stood up for yourself, Maya. That's not easy to do, but you did it. That evening, Maya sat in her room, trying to process everything. She should have felt relieved, but the text messages and Officer Grant's cryptic warning still weighed on her mind. Whoever had tried to intimidate her wasn't finished yet. Her phone buzzed, and her heart jumped. It was another unknown number. The message read, * you got lucky. Watch your back, *. Maya's relief evaporated, replaced by a sinking dread. She stared at the screen, her mind racing. What had she just survived, and what was still to come? Maya stared at her phone, the words * you got lucky. Watch your back, * seared into her mind. Her hands trembled as she locked the screen, her breath coming in short gasps. The trial was over, the nightmare should have ended, but this felt like the beginning of something far worse. Evelyn knocked gently on her door before stepping in. Baby, are you okay? Dinner's ready. Maya quickly shoved the phone under her pillow, forcing a smile. Yeah, Mom. I'll be out in a minute. Evelyn narrowed her eyes. What's wrong? Nothing, Maya lied, her voice cracking slightly. Just tired. Evelyn walked over, sitting on the edge of the bed. Maya, you've been through so much. If something's bothering you, you need to tell me. Maya hesitated, her throat tightening. Should she tell her mom about the text? About the fear gnawing at her insides? She didn't want to burden her, but the thought of facing this alone was unbearable. She reached for her phone and unlocked it, showing her mom the message. Evelyn's face darkened as she read it, her jaw tightening. Who sent this? I don't know, Maya said, her voice trembling. I've been getting messages like this since the trial started. Evelyn stood abruptly, pacing the room. Why didn't you tell me sooner? We need to report this. I didn't want to worry you, Maya said, tears welling in her eyes. I thought it would stop after the trial. Evelyn sat back down, pulling Maya into a tight hug. "We'll handle this together," she said firmly. "No one threatens my daughter and gets away with it." The next morning, Evelyn and Maya met with Ms. Daniels at her office. Maya handed over her phone, showing the string of messages. Ms. Daniels frowned as she read through them, her sharp mind already working on a plan. "This is harassment," Ms. Daniels said. "We'll report it to the authorities and push for an investigation. Whoever is behind this won't get away with it." "But what if it's someone from the police?" Maya asked, her voice shaking. "What if they're protecting each other?" Ms. Daniels' expression softened. "I won't let that happen, Maya. You have my word." Evelyn placed a protective arm around her daughter. "We trust you," she said, "but we need to act fast." That afternoon, Ms. Daniels filed a formal complaint with the local police department. She also contacted an independent agency to ensure the investigation would be unbiased. The wheels were in motion, but Maya couldn't shake the feeling of being watched. Her fears were confirmed later that evening. As she walked home from the corner store, clutching a bag of snacks, she noticed a dark sedan creeping along the curb. The windows were tinted, and the car moved slowly, its headlights casting an eerie glow. Maya's heart raced. She quickened her pace, glancing over her shoulder every few steps. The car kept pace with her, its engine a low hum that sent chills down her spine. When she turned onto her street, she bolted, her legs pumping as fear overtook her. She didn't stop until she reached her apartment building, slamming the door behind her and locking it with shaking hands. Evelyn rushed to her side. "Maya, what's wrong?" "A car," Maya panted, her voice trembling. "It was following me." Evelyn's face darkened. "Did you see who was inside?" Maya shook her head. The windows were tinted, but it felt wrong. Evelyn wrapped her arms around her daughter, her heart pounding. "We're reporting this too. You're not going through this alone." The next day, Ms. Daniels escalated the situation. She contacted local news outlets, sharing details about the harassment and Maya's experience of being followed. The media coverage sparked outrage, putting pressure on the police to take action. But the attention brought new challenges. The story spread quickly, and while many people voiced their support for Maya, others were less kind. Online comments accused her of lying, of seeking attention, of playing the victim. Maya tried to ignore the negativity, but it was impossible to escape. Even at school, the whispers followed her. "Isn't that the girl from the news?" one student muttered as she walked by. "I heard she made the whole thing up," another said. Maya clenched her fists, her head down as she hurried to class. Tasha caught up with her, a sympathetic look on her face. "Hey," she said softly. "Ignore them. They don't know anything." "I'm trying," Maya said, her voice barely above a whisper. "But it's so hard." Tasha squeezed her shoulder. "You're stronger than all of them. Don't let them win." That evening, as Maya sat in her room, her phone buzzed again. Her stomach sank as she read the message. "You should have stayed quiet." Her hands shook as she showed the message to Evelyn, who immediately called Ms. Daniels. Within the hour, a security team was stationed outside their apartment. The next morning, Maya woke to find a note slipped under their door. It was scrawled in messy handwriting, the words chilling, "This isn't over." Tears filled her eyes as she handed the note to Evelyn, who stared at it in shock. "We're going to get through this," Evelyn said, her voice steady despite the fear in her eyes. "They won't scare us into silence." Ms. Daniels arrived shortly after, taking the note and promising to push the authorities harder. "They're trying to intimidate you," she said, "but we won't back down. This ends now." Maya nodded, though her resolve was beginning to waver. The threats were escalating, and she couldn't help but wonder. What would they do next? Maya sat at the kitchen table, her eyes locked on the note that had been slipped under their door. The messy handwriting, the ominous words. "This isn't over." It all felt like a shadow creeping closer, threatening to consume her. Evelyn paced the room, her phone pressed to her ear. "Yes, I want a full report filed," she said, her voice tight with frustration. "My daughter is being harassed, and I expect results." Maya's mind swirled with fear and frustration. She thought winning the trial would bring peace, but it had only invited more chaos into her life. The added security outside their apartment helped, but the threats still felt too close, like a storm she couldn't outrun. Ms. Daniels arrived later that morning, her expression grim but determined. She placed a folder on the table and sat across from Maya. "We have a lead," she said. Maya's heart leapt. "You know who's behind this?" "Not exactly," Ms. Daniels said, flipping open the folder. Inside were several pages of documents, along with a photo of Officer Grant. The investigation into the harassment is still ongoing, but I requested his personnel file. There's a pattern. Evelyn leaned in, her brow furrowed. What kind of pattern? Ms. Daniels tapped the photo. Grant has a history of questionable behavior. Complaints from civilians about intimidation tactics, withholding evidence, and even threats. Most of these cases were swept under the rug, but they paint a clear picture. Maya's stomach churned. So you think he's behind this? It's possible, Ms. Daniels said. Or he's connected to whoever is. Either way, we need to keep pressing. The next few days passed in a haze of tension. Maya stayed home from school, too afraid to face the whispers and stares. The security guards stationed outside their apartment gave her a sense of safety, but the fear was always there, lurking beneath the surface. One afternoon, while Evelyn was at work, Maya sat on the couch, sketching to calm her nerves. She had just started adding details to a drawing of the city skyline when there was a loud knock at the door. Her heart jumped. She peered through the peephole, her pulse racing when she saw a man in a dark suit. He held up a badge. Maya Johnson? My name is Detective Harris. I'm with the state police. I need to speak with you. Maya hesitated. Ms. Daniels had warned her to be cautious, even with law enforcement. She called her attorney, who picked up on the first ring. There's a detective at the door, Maya said, her voice shaky. Don't open it, Ms. Daniels said firmly. I'm on my way. Maya relayed the message to the detective, who nodded and stepped back. I'll wait, he said. When Ms. Daniels arrived 20 minutes later, she scrutinized the detective's badge and credentials before letting him inside. What's this about? She asked, her tone guarded. Detective Harris sat down at the table, pulling out a notepad. We've been monitoring the harassment case, and we have reason to believe it's tied to someone within the local police department. Maya's breath caught. You mean Officer Grant? Harris hesitated. Grant is one of the names we're investigating, but I can't confirm anything yet. What I can say is that the threats appear to be an attempt to silence you. Someone doesn't want you speaking out about what happened. Ms. Daniels crossed her arms. Do you have any concrete evidence? Harris shook his head. Not yet, but we're working on it. I wanted to warn you to stay vigilant. If you notice anything suspicious, report it immediately. Maya nodded, her fear mounting. Do you think they'll try to hurt me? We're taking every precaution to ensure your safety, Harris said. Just be careful. That evening, Evelyn sat with Maya in her room, holding her hand as they talked. You've been so strong through all of this, Evelyn said softly. I know it's not fair, but you're not alone. Maya leaned against her mom, tears welling in her eyes. I just want it to stop. I want my life back. You'll get it back, Evelyn said. We're going to get through this together. The following day, Ms. Daniels received a call from the independent agency investigating the threats. The caller, a stern woman named Agent Keller, requested an urgent meeting with Maya and her legal team. At the meeting, Agent Keller placed a small folder on the table. We've identified the source of the text messages, she said. Maya held her breath as the agent opened the folder, revealing a name, Officer Daniel Grant. Evelyn gasped, her hand flying to her mouth. Ms. Daniels' jaw tightened. We suspected as much, she said. But why would he go to these lengths? Keller's expression darkened. Grant was heavily invested in the case against Maya. It's likely he felt her acquittal was a direct blow to his credibility. These threats appear to be his way of retaliating. Maya's heart sank. So he's trying to scare me into staying silent. Keller nodded. That's our belief. But now that we have evidence tying him to the messages, we can move forward with charges. Later that evening, Maya sat on her bed, staring out the window. The news that Grant was behind the threats gave her a strange sense of relief. It wasn't some faceless enemy, but it also filled her with dread. What else was he capable of? Her phone buzzed and she flinched. She picked it up, her stomach dropping when she saw another message. Asterisk, you think they can stop me? You're wrong, asterisk. Maya's hands trembled as she showed the message to Evelyn. He's not stopping, she whispered, her voice shaking. Even after they found out. Evelyn hugged her tightly. We'll report it. He won't win, Maya. I promise you. Maya sat in the dimly lit living room, her hands gripping her phone as she reread the latest message. Asterisk, you think they can stop me? You're wrong, asterisk. Her stomach churned with fear, but beneath it all, anger bubbled to the surface. She was tired of feeling helpless, tired of being a target. Evelyn paced the room, her frustration evident. "This has to stop," she said, her voice shaking. "I don't care what it takes. He can't keep terrorizing my daughter." Ms. Daniels, who had rushed over the moment Evelyn called, placed a hand on her shoulder. "We're escalating this," she said firmly. "The authorities already have enough evidence to act, but this proves we need immediate intervention." "What do you mean?" Maya asked, her voice tentative. "We're filing for an emergency protection order," Ms. Daniels explained. "It will legally bar him from contacting you or coming near you. If he violates it, he'll be arrested immediately." Maya nodded, though the idea of a piece of paper protecting her felt fragile. "What if he doesn't care about the law?" Ms. Daniels' expression softened. "Then we make sure the law comes down on him hard. You're not alone in this, Maya." The next morning, Maya, Evelyn, and Ms. Daniels met with Agent Keller at the state police headquarters. Keller had already prepared the necessary paperwork for the protection order and assured them that the case against Officer Grant was moving forward. "We're close to filing formal charges," Keller said, her voice steady. "But I need you to be patient. Building a case like this takes time." Maya swallowed hard. "How much time?" "Days, maybe weeks," Keller admitted. "But in the meantime, we'll ensure your safety. Officers have been assigned to monitor your home, and we're working to trace every digital footprint Grant left behind." Evelyn placed a protective arm around Maya. "We'll do whatever it takes." That evening, back at the apartment, Maya tried to focus on her drawings, but her mind kept wandering. Every sound outside made her jump. Every shadow seemed menacing. She hated feeling this way, trapped, paranoid, small. "Maya," Evelyn called from the kitchen. "Dinner's ready." Maya put down her pencil and joined her mom at the table. They ate in silence for a while, the tension between them palpable. Finally, Evelyn spoke. "I've been thinking, maybe we should stay somewhere else for a while." "Like where?" Maya asked, her voice soft. "Your Aunt Sandra's house," Evelyn suggested. "It's outside the city, and it'll give us some space from all this." Maya hesitated. She loved her aunt, but the thought of uprooting her life felt overwhelming. "What about school? And the investigation?" "We'll figure it out," Evelyn said. "Your safety is what matters most." Later that night, as Maya lay in bed, her phone buzzed again. Her heart sank as she picked it up, dreading what she might see. The message was short but chilling. "You can't hide." Tears pricked her eyes as she stared at the screen. She wanted to scream, to fight back, but all she could do was clutch her phone and pray that this nightmare would end. The following day, Ms. Daniels called with good news. The emergency protection order had been approved, and officers were already en route to serve Grant with the documents. "This is a step in the right direction," Ms. Daniels said. "Stay strong, Maya." Maya tried to take comfort in the news, but her nerves remained on edge. She spent the day packing her things, preparing for the temporary move to her aunt's house. Evelyn had already arranged for time off work, determined to keep her daughter safe. That evening, as they loaded the last of their bags into the car, a black sedan pulled up across the street. Maya froze, her heart pounding as she recognized the vehicle. It was the same car that had followed her before. "Mom," she whispered, her voice shaking. "It's him." Evelyn turned to see the sedan, her face pale with fear. "Get in the car," she said, her voice firm but trembling. "Now." Maya obeyed, scrambling into the passenger seat as Evelyn got behind the wheel. The sedan remained parked, its engine idling ominously. Evelyn called the police, her voice sharp and urgent. "This is Evelyn Johnson. My daughter and I are being watched by a man in a black sedan. He's the same person who's been threatening her. We need help immediately." Within minutes, a patrol car arrived, its lights flashing. The black sedan sped off, disappearing into the night. The officers took Evelyn's statement and assured her that they would patrol the area regularly, but the encounter left Maya shaken. As they drove to Sandra's house, Maya stared out the window, her mind racing. The threats were escalating, and the fear was becoming unbearable. But deep down, she felt something else, a spark of defiance. "I'm not going to let him win," Maya said quietly. Evelyn glanced at her, her eyes filled with both pride and worry. "You're stronger than he thinks, Maya." Maya nodded, gripping the edge of her seat. "I just want my life back." The drive to Aunt Sandra's house was long and quiet. Maya stared out the window, her thoughts racing. The image of the black sedan parked ominously across the street lingered in her mind, making her stomach churn. Every mile they put between themselves and the city felt like a small victory, but the fear refused to leave her. Evelyn reached over and gave Maya's hand a reassuring squeeze. "We're safe now," she said softly. "No one knows where we're going." Maya nodded but didn't speak. She wanted to believe her mom, but the threats had a way of making her doubt everything. Sandra greeted them warmly when they arrived, her home a stark contrast to the chaos they'd left behind. It was a cozy house nestled in a quiet suburb, surrounded by tall trees and a sense of calm that felt foreign to Maya. "You're safe here," Sandra said, pulling Maya into a tight hug. "No one's going to hurt you." Maya managed a small smile. "Thanks, Aunt Sandra." Sandra led them inside, showing them to the guest room where Maya would be staying. It was a small but comfortable space with soft lavender walls and a quilted bedspread. Maya sat on the edge of the bed, taking a deep breath. For the first time in days, she felt a glimmer of peace. The next morning, Maya woke to the smell of pancakes. She followed the aroma to the kitchen, where Sandra was flipping a stack of golden pancakes onto a plate. Evelyn was sipping coffee at the table, looking more relaxed than she had in weeks. "Good morning, sweetie," Sandra said, handing Maya a plate. "Thought we could all use a good breakfast." Maya sat down, the warmth of the food and the quiet atmosphere easing some of her tension. For a moment, it almost felt like things were normal. But the peace didn't last. Later that day, Maya's phone buzzed. She hesitated before picking it up, her stomach sinking as she saw another message from an unknown number. "You can run, but you can't hide." Her breath caught, and her hands trembled as she showed the message to Evelyn and Sandra. Evelyn's face darkened with anger. "How does he even know?" she said, her voice rising. "We didn't tell anyone we were coming here." Sandra frowned, her expression thoughtful. "He must be tracking her phone." Maya's eyes widened. "Tracking my phone? Is that even possible?" "Yes," Sandra said firmly. "But we can stop it." She grabbed Maya's phone and began explaining how tracking software could be installed without her knowing. "We'll take it to a tech shop and have them check for spyware. In the meantime, turn it off." Maya nodded, shutting down her phone and placing it on the table. She felt exposed, like the walls were closing in again. What if it's not just my phone? What if he's watching us some other way? Evelyn placed a comforting hand on her shoulder. "We're going to figure this out. You're safe here, Maya. Don't forget that." The next few days were a mix of calm and unease. The tech shop confirmed that tracking software had been installed on Maya's phone, likely through a fake link she had clicked months ago. They removed it, but the discovery only deepened the sense of violation. Evelyn reported the findings to Agent Keller, who promised to expedite the investigation. "This is more than harassment," Keller said during a phone call. "This is stalking, and we're treating it as a criminal case." Despite the reassurances, Maya couldn't shake the feeling that Grant, or whoever was behind the threats, was always one step ahead. Every shadow outside the window, every unfamiliar car on the street, made her heart race. One night, as Maya lay in bed, she heard a noise outside. It was faint but distinct, a rustling sound, like someone walking through the yard. Her heart pounded as she sat up, straining to hear. She crept to the window and peeked through the curtains. At first, she saw nothing but darkness. But then a figure moved near the edge of the yard, their silhouette barely visible in the dim light. Maya's breath caught. She grabbed her phone, quickly dialing her mom's number. Evelyn answered on the first ring. "What's wrong?" "There's someone outside," Maya whispered, her voice shaking. Evelyn and Sandra rushed to her room, and Sandra immediately called the police. Evelyn peeked out the window, but saw nothing. "Are you sure you saw someone?" she asked. Maya nodded, her hands trembling. "I saw them, Mom. I swear." The police arrived within minutes, searching the property with flashlights. They found no one, but one of the officers noticed footprints in the soft dirt near the edge of the yard. "Looks like someone was here," he said. "We'll increase patrols in the area." Maya felt a mixture of relief and dread. The police were taking it seriously, but whoever was doing this wasn't backing down. The following day, Maya received another call from Ms. Daniels. "We've got him," she said, her voice triumphant. "Officer Grant has been arrested." Maya's heart skipped a beat. "They caught him?" "Yes," Ms. Daniels confirmed. "They found evidence linking him to the threats and the tracking software. He's in custody now." Evelyn hugged Maya tightly, tears streaming down her face. "It's over, baby. He can't hurt you anymore." Maya wanted to believe it, but the fear didn't completely fade. Grant might be behind bars, but the damage he'd done lingered like a shadow. Still, she felt a spark of hope. Maybe, just maybe, this nightmare was finally coming to an end. That night, As Maya lay in bed, she stared at the ceiling, her thoughts swirling. The threats, the fear, the fight for her innocence, it had all taken a toll. But she had survived. And now, she was determined to rebuild her life, one step at a time. Maya woke the next morning to the sound of birds chirping outside her window. The soft light streaming into the room felt different, warmer, more peaceful. For the first time in weeks, she allowed herself to believe that things might actually be better now. Evelyn knocked on her door and peeked inside. "Morning, sweetie," she said with a smile. "How are you feeling?" Maya sat up, rubbing her eyes. "Better, I think." Evelyn stepped inside and sat on the edge of the bed. "It's okay if you're still scared," she said gently. "What you went through was a lot." Maya nodded, her throat tightening. "I know he's in jail, but it still feels like he's out there." Evelyn wrapped her arms around her daughter. "He can't hurt you anymore," she said firmly. "We're safe now." Later that day, Maya and Evelyn met with Ms. Daniels at a local cafe. The attorney's expression was a mix of satisfaction and caution as she handed Maya a folder. "This is everything we've uncovered about Grant's actions," Ms. Daniels said. "The evidence against him is strong. He'll likely face significant charges." Maya flipped through the documents, her stomach twisting as she read the details. The tracking software, the threatening messages, the harassment. "He did all of this just because I won the case?" she asked, her voice trembling. Ms. Daniels sighed. "For someone like Grant, it wasn't just about the case. It was about control. He wanted to intimidate you, to make you feel powerless." Maya's hands clenched into fists. "Well, he failed." Ms. Daniels smiled. "That's right. And now he'll face the consequences of his actions." Despite the progress, adjusting to life after the threats wasn't easy. Maya returned to school, but the stares and whispers followed her everywhere. Some students avoided her, while others treated her like a curiosity. "Hey, Maya," one girl said hesitantly during lunch. "Is it true that cop was stalking you?" Maya froze, her appetite vanishing. "I don't want to talk about it," she said, standing up and leaving the table. Tasha caught up with her in the hallway. "Are you okay?" she asked, her tone filled with concern. "I'm fine," Maya said, though her voice was tight. "I just wish everyone would stop talking about it." "They'll move on eventually," Tasha said. "People are just nosy." Maya nodded, but the weight of the attention lingered. She wanted to move on, to feel normal again, but it felt like the world wouldn't let her. A week later, Maya received an unexpected phone call from Agent Keller. "We've uncovered new information," Keller said, her tone serious. "It seems Officer Grant wasn't acting alone." Maya's heart sank. "What do you mean?" "There are indications that someone else within the department may have been involved," Keller explained. "We're investigating now, but I wanted to warn you. If you notice anything unusual, report it immediately." Maya felt the familiar knot of fear tighten in her stomach. "Do you think I'm still in danger?" Keller hesitated. "We don't believe so, but we're not taking any chances. Stay vigilant." The news rattled Maya, but she refused to let it paralyze her. Instead, she channeled her emotions into her art, spending hours sketching and painting. The creative outlet became her refuge, a way to process everything she had endured. One evening, as she worked on a new piece, Evelyn entered the room, holding a large envelope. "This came for you," she said, handing it over. Maya opened the envelope and gasped. Inside was a letter from the state attorney's office, along with a formal apology for the wrongful arrest. Included was a check, compensation for the emotional and financial toll the case had taken on her family. Evelyn's eyes filled with tears as she read the letter. "This doesn't erase what happened," she said, "but it's a step toward justice." Maya nodded, her heart swelling with a mix of emotions. The apology felt like validation, proof that her fight hadn't been in vain. Despite the progress, the news about a potential accomplice in the police department continued to weigh on Maya's mind. She couldn't shake the feeling that someone was still watching her, waiting for the right moment to strike. Her fears were confirmed one night when she noticed a figure lingering near the edge of Sandra's property. The person was partially obscured by the trees, but their presence was unmistakable. Maya's heart raced as she grabbed her phone and dialed Evelyn's number. "Mom," she whispered, "there's someone outside." Evelyn rushed to her side, her face pale. "Stay here," she said, grabbing her own phone and calling the police. Within minutes, patrol cars arrived, their flashing lights illuminating the yard. The figure had disappeared by then, but the officers found fresh footprints near the fence line. We'll increase patrols in the area, one officer said, his tone grim. But you should stay on high alert. Maya sat on the couch that night, her knees pulled to her chest as she tried to make sense of it all. Who else was involved? And why wouldn't they leave her alone? Maya sat at the kitchen table the next morning, her fingers curled around a mug of tea that had long since gone cold. She stared at the swirling patterns on the surface, her thoughts as tangled as the steam rising from the cup. The sight of someone lurking on the edge of the property the night before replayed in her mind like a bad dream. Evelyn placed a hand on Maya's shoulder, her own worry visible despite her attempt to stay strong. "Sweetie, we'll figure this out," she said softly. "We're safe here. But for how long?" Maya asked, her voice trembling. "It feels like no matter where we go, they find us." Sandra entered the room, holding her phone. "I just spoke with Agent Keller," she said. "They're making progress on the investigation. They think they're close to identifying Grant's accomplice." Maya sat up straighter. "So it wasn't just him?" Sandra shook her head, her expression grim. "It seems like someone else in the department was helping him. Keller believes they were feeding him information about where you were and when." Evelyn's jaw tightened. "Unbelievable. How deep does this go?" Sandra gave a reassuring smile, though it didn't reach her eyes. "The important thing is that they're closing in. We just need to stay cautious." The day passed quietly, but the tension was palpable. Maya tried to focus on her sketchbook, pouring her emotions into intricate lines and shading. Drawing had always been her escape, but even now, she couldn't fully shake the unease. Later that afternoon, a knock at the door made everyone jump. Evelyn hurried to answer it, peeking through the peephole before opening it cautiously. It was Agent Keller, flanked by 2 other agents. "We've identified Grant's accomplice," Keller said, her tone clipped. "And we need to talk." The living room felt like a war room as Keller spread out documents and photographs on the coffee table. She pointed to a picture of a middle-aged man with a severe expression. "This is Officer James Thorne," she said. "He's a longtime colleague of Grant's and has been linked to several cases of misconduct. We have evidence tying him to the harassment campaign against Maya." Maya's stomach twisted. "What kind of evidence?" Keller gestured to the papers. "Phone records, email exchanges, and witness testimony. Thorne and Grant worked together to track your movements and intimidate you." Evelyn's hands curled into fists. "So what happens now?" "We've issued a warrant for Thorne's arrest," Keller said. "But we need you to be on high alert. He knows we're closing in, and he might try to make a move." Maya's heart sank. "What kind of move?" Keller's face was serious. "We don't know, but we're not taking any chances. I'll have agents stationed here around the clock." That evening, the tension in the house was suffocating. Maya sat on the couch, scrolling through her phone in an attempt to distract herself. Evelyn and Sandra whispered in the kitchen, their voices low but urgent. The sound of footsteps outside made everyone freeze. Maya's heart pounded as she turned toward the door. A shadow moved across the window, and a soft knock followed. Evelyn approached the door slowly, her phone in hand, ready to call the police. "Who is it?" she called out. A man's voice replied, smooth and unsettling. "Just here to talk." Evelyn motioned for Sandra to call Keller while she pressed her ear to the door. "We're not opening the door," she said firmly. "Leave now, or I'm calling the police." The man chuckled. "You can call whoever you want. I'll be gone before they get here." Maya's stomach churned. She could feel the malice in his tone. Evelyn backed away from the door, her face pale. "Stay inside," she said, her voice shaking. "He won't get in." Within minutes, agents arrived, their flashlights cutting through the darkness outside. Maya and her family huddled together as they watched through the window. The agents searched the yard, but found no sign of the man. "He's playing games," Keller said when she arrived. "But we're not going to let him scare you." Maya nodded, though the fear in her chest refused to dissipate. "What if he comes back?" "He won't get the chance," Keller assured her. "We're tightening security, and we'll have him in custody soon." The following day, Keller called with news. Thorne had been spotted in a nearby town, and agents were closing in. Maya felt a flicker of hope, but it was quickly overshadowed by dread. What if he slipped away? What if he came after her again? As night fell, the house felt like a fortress, with agents stationed at every entry point. But even with the heightened security, Maya struggled to sleep. Every creak of the floorboards, every rustle of the wind, set her nerves on edge. Around midnight, a loud crash shattered the silence. Maya bolted upright in bed, her heart racing. Evelyn rushed into her room, her face pale. "Stay here," she whispered. "Don't move." Maya grabbed her phone, her hands shaking as she dialed Keller's number. "Someone's inside," she whispered, her voice barely audible. "We're on our way," Keller said. "Stay where you are. Help is coming." Maya could hear muffled voices and heavy footsteps downstairs. She clutched her phone tightly, her pulse pounding in her ears. This wasn't over, not yet. Maya's breathing was shallow as she crouched behind her bed, her phone clutched tightly in her hands. Every sound from downstairs, the muffled voices, the creak of the floorboards, felt deafening. Her heart raced, her mind spinning with fear and confusion. Who was in the house? Was it Officer Thorne? Was he alone? Evelyn had locked Maya's door before leaving, but it didn't feel like enough. Maya pressed her back against the wall, praying silently for the agents outside to intervene before anything happened. Suddenly, a loud bang echoed through the house, followed by a voice shouting, "FBI! Stay where you are." Maya jumped at the sound, her pulse racing. The footsteps downstairs turned frantic, heavy boots pounding against the wooden floor. Then came another shout, this time familiar. It was Agent Keller. "James Thorne, you're surrounded. Don't make this harder on yourself." For a moment, there was silence. Then, the sound of a window shattering pierced the air. Maya didn't move, didn't breathe, until she heard Keller's voice again. "We've got him," she called out. Moments later, Evelyn rushed into Maya's room, her face pale but her eyes filled with relief. "It's over," she said, pulling Maya into a tight hug. "They caught him." Maya's knees buckled, and she sank to the floor, tears streaming down her face. "He was here," she whispered, her voice trembling. "He was really here." Evelyn stroked her hair, holding her close. "But he's gone now. He can't hurt you anymore." Downstairs, the house was chaos. Agents moved quickly, securing the scene and collecting evidence. Thorne had been apprehended while trying to escape through a broken window. Maya could hear the agents' voices, sharp and commanding, as they relayed information to one another. Agent Keller appeared in the doorway of Maya's room, her expression grim but calm. "He's in custody," she confirmed. "He won't be bothering you again." Maya wiped her tears, her voice shaky. "Why was he here? What did he want?" Keller hesitated, then sighed. "We believe he was trying to intimidate you into retracting your statements against Grant. With the evidence we've gathered, Thorne likely knew he was next. This was a desperate attempt to silence you." Evelyn's hands balled into fists. "He broke into our home to scare a 16-year-old girl? He's a coward." Keller nodded. "And now he'll face the consequences." The following day, the news broke. James Thorne, a decorated police officer with a long career, had been arrested for his role in the harassment and stalking of Maya Johnson. The media coverage was swift, with headlines exposing the corruption within the department and the lengths some officers had gone to in order to protect themselves. Maya watched the news from the couch, her emotions a mix of relief and exhaustion. Evelyn sat beside her, holding her hand tightly. "The truth is out now," Evelyn said softly. "Everyone knows what they did to you." Maya nodded, though the victory felt bittersweet. "It doesn't change what happened," she said. "But maybe it'll stop them from hurting anyone else." The days that followed were a blur of interviews, statements, and legal proceedings. Thorne and Grant faced multiple charges, including harassment, stalking, and misconduct. Maya's testimony became a central piece of the case, and Ms. Daniels worked tirelessly to ensure justice was served. But the road to healing wasn't easy. Maya still struggled with fear, especially at night. The memories of the threats, the lurking shadows, and the invasion of her home clung to her like a heavy weight. One evening, as she sat in her room, Evelyn knocked softly and stepped inside. "I spoke to the therapist we talked about," she said. "They have an opening next week." Maya hesitated, then nodded. "I think I need it," she admitted. "I don't want to feel scared all the time." Evelyn sat beside her, pulling her into a hug. "You're so brave, Maya. You've been through so much, and you're still standing." "I'm tired of being scared," Maya whispered. "I just want to feel normal again." As the weeks passed, Maya began to rebuild her sense of normalcy. She returned to her art, finding solace in the lines and colors that once brought her peace. She met with the therapist, slowly unpacking the trauma she had endured. And she leaned on her mom and Aunt Sandra, who never wavered in their support. But the most significant moment came when the verdicts were announced. Both Grant and Thorne were found guilty on all charges, their sentences ensuring they would never hold positions of power again. For Maya, it felt like a weight had finally been lifted. As she stood outside the courthouse, reporters swarming around her, she took a deep breath and spoke into the microphones. "This isn't just about me," she said, her voice steady. "It's about everyone who's been silenced, everyone who's been made to feel small. We have to stand up, even when it's hard, because the truth matters." That night, as Maya sat on her bed, her sketchbook open in her lap, she felt something she hadn't felt in a long time: hope. The fight wasn't over, but she had proven that she was stronger than her fears. For the first time in weeks, she slept soundly, the shadows no longer feeling quite so threatening. The courtroom was silent as Maya sat in the gallery, her hands clasped tightly in her lap. Today marked the final sentencing hearing for both Officer Grant and Officer Thorne. The long journey of fear, resilience, and justice had brought her here, and while her heart still carried scars, this moment felt like the culmination of everything she had endured. Evelyn sat beside her, her arm wrapped protectively around Maya's shoulders. Ms. Daniels was a few rows ahead, conferring quietly with Agent Keller. The judge entered the courtroom, and everyone rose. "Be seated," the judge said, her voice firm and commanding. "This hearing is to determine the sentences for Daniel Grant and James Thorne, who have been convicted on multiple counts, including harassment, stalking, and abuse of power." The judge's gaze swept over the defendants, both sitting stiffly at the defense table. Their once imposing presence now seemed diminished, their expressions a mix of defiance and resignation. The prosecutor rose to address the court. "Your Honor, the actions of these men were not only criminal but deeply unethical. Their abuse of power has caused irreparable harm, not just to Maya Johnson, but to the community's trust in law enforcement. We ask for the maximum sentence to ensure they are held accountable." Ms. Daniels stood next, her voice steady and resolute. Maya Johnson was an innocent teenager caught in the crosshairs of a system that failed her. These men used intimidation and fear to silence her, but she refused to back down. Today, this court has the opportunity to send a clear message. No one is above the law, and no victim should be silenced. When it was time for the defendants to speak, Grant rose first. He hesitated, his gaze flickering to the judge before dropping to the floor. "I regret my actions," he said flatly. "I made mistakes, but I never intended to cause harm." The room was heavy with silence as Thorne stood next. His voice was colder, his tone defensive. "I did what I thought was necessary to protect my colleague. I didn't mean for it to escalate the way it did." Maya clenched her fists, anger simmering beneath her calm exterior. Their words felt hollow, lacking true remorse. She wanted to shout, to demand they take responsibility, but she held her ground, knowing their punishment would speak louder than anything they could say. The judge cleared her throat, her expression stern. "Officers Grant and Thorne, your actions betrayed the trust placed in you by the community and this court. You targeted an innocent young woman, violating her rights and abusing your power to protect yourselves. Your behavior has no place in law enforcement or society." She leaned forward, her voice firm. "Daniel Grant, you are sentenced to 10 years in prison without the possibility of parole. James Thorne, you are sentenced to 12 years in prison without the possibility of parole. Both of you will also face permanent revocation of your law enforcement certifications." Gasps rippled through the courtroom. Maya felt Evelyn's hand tighten around hers as the judge's gavel struck, signaling the end of the hearing. Outside the courthouse, reporters crowded around Maya, their cameras flashing and microphones thrust forward. Maya hesitated, but Ms. Daniels gave her an encouraging nod. Taking a deep breath, Maya stepped forward. "This isn't just a victory for me," she said, her voice steady despite the swarm around her. "It's a victory for everyone who has ever felt powerless, for everyone who has been told their voice doesn't matter. We stood up, we fought, and we won. But the fight isn't over. We have to keep pushing for accountability and justice, for everyone." The crowd erupted into applause, and for the first time, Maya felt a sense of closure. She had reclaimed her voice, and the world was listening. The days that followed were a whirlwind. The story of Maya's courage spread far and wide, inspiring others to speak out against injustice. Organizations reached out, inviting her to share her story at events and panels. While it was overwhelming at times, Maya embraced the opportunity to turn her pain into purpose. Back at home, life began to settle into a new normal. Maya returned to school, where her classmates treated her with newfound respect. Tasha remained by her side, her unwavering support a constant source of comfort. "You're kind of famous now," Tasha teased one afternoon. Does this mean I get VIP tickets when you're on TV? Maya laughed, the sound light and genuine. Only if you promise to tell me when my head gets too big. One evening, Maya sat in her room, finishing a new drawing. It was a cityscape, vibrant and full of life, but in the center stood a figure, small but unshakable, standing tall against the towering shadows around her. It felt like a reflection of her journey, a testament to her strength. Evelyn knocked on the door, peeking inside. How's it coming along? Maya held up the drawing, a proud smile on her face. It's done. Evelyn stepped inside, sitting beside her. It's beautiful, Maya. Just like you. Maya leaned against her mom, her heart finally feeling light. We made it, she said softly. We did, Evelyn replied, her voice filled with pride. And we're never looking back. That night, as Maya lay in bed, she felt a peace she hadn't known in months. The shadows no longer seemed threatening, the fear no longer overwhelming. She had faced the storm and come out stronger. And for the first time, she allowed herself to dream, not of escape, but of a future filled with hope.